it's good to be back and doing this podcast. This is a little PIAP, which is Pod in the Park, crossed over with Marshall for Mayor. Marshall Woodmansey right over there running for Mayor of San Jose. I guess, Marshall, do you want to kind of give us a little bit of background on who you are? For anyone new watching this, don't know who you are, and what you're running for and what your life has been like in San Jose.
That's great. My name is Marshall Allen Woodmansey. I moved to the West San Jose neighborhood in 2004 when I was 4. So do the math. I was born in the year 2000. One of the terms that I kind of wrote down when preparing for this interview, this episode, was being a child of climate change, right? Or being a child of the 21st century, right? And Cameron and I both share that. We both grew up in San Jose, right? The capital of Silicon Valley, and we're constantly inundated with all of the changing of the world. I was homeschooled till high school, so I got a very on-the-ground education in San Jose, volunteering, working in the natural ecology and whatnot. I went to high school with Cameron. He got me into public high school. I owe a lot to this man for helping me along my path. He's 2 years older than me, and we've known each other since I moved in. I've done some leadership work with Cameron. We started Project Now SJ to bring young people, intergenerational really, to really collaborate on building a better San Jose through activism. I've hosted a podcast with Cameron to talk about, our world's issues and how the youth are kind of approaching these really big challenges. And in 2019, I was on the ballot to represent Cameron and I on the city council, right? So I ran to represent 100,000 people. I got 7% of the votes. It was a pre-pandemic election, so there was a lot of energy, a lot of engagement. And a few months ago, right before I jumped into my second semester at San Jose State, I got a call from one of the leading candidates for mayor. I'm the leading candidate for mayor, but the other one. And they offered me employment, but because of my status as a student, they ended up not accepting me for the job. But it got me thinking about running again, something I didn't think I'd see myself doing. And so in March, I was nominated by 50 people in my neighborhood to run for mayor. And here we are today, cool. 55 days from the election.
Cool. So I guess I'll tell a little bit about me. So yes, I've known Marshall for probably about 18 years now. I was born and raised in San Jose, California, almost 24 years of my life. I went to San Jose State University and got my bachelor's degree in business analytics. I started my early working career working at the YMCA. After about 4 or 5 years of working there, worked my way up to aquatics program coordinator at 19. It's pretty young. I was running a $90,000 a month swim lesson revenue program. And from there, after that, I've had an internship, with a startup. I worked at Starbucks. I was in a student consultancy program, which is the, Gary J. Sabana Honors Program. And now basically currently I'm in the interview process with a fintech company that, focuses on cryptocurrency, and I'm an avid cryptocurrency and Bitcoin supporter. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me. I wanted to touch on, Marshall, when you said, you brought up that you ran for city council, 2020 when you were 19. And I remember that. I remember I was kind of helping in the very beginning a little bit as your campaign manager. But that was, so I wanted to ask, basically, from your current perspective, now that you're running for mayor 2 years later after you first ran, I want to know what feels different about running now versus back then. Or are you more prepared? Are you more focused? Do you think the general, environment has gotten worse and making it harder for you to run? Like, what is kind of that change from 2020 to now?
So let's talk about what's similar. So what's similar is I'm running for office. And that puts you in a category of, you're getting certain information streams, you're getting asked certain questions. And I think that running for municipal office in any age really puts you at the leading edge of what's happening in your community. Now, my degree is in global studies, right? And so I'm trying to bring together what's happening in my own community and try to extrapolate that and try to find out more about what's going on by looking at other communities, right? And so what we're seeing here today is COVID-19. That is a globally felt challenge, an obstacle that we've all been struggling with basically since this end of my last campaign, right? And so what I'm looking at is it's a humanity that has suffered, and we've suffered a lot, right? We've suffered from isolation, we've suffered from changes in lifestyle, changes in family structures because of loss of loved ones, or because loved ones won't come out anymore, or all of this loss. And at the same time, one of my biggest policy platforms is about losing fossil fuels. One, because they're a non-renewable resource, so they're phasing out. And two, because as a developed nation, it's our responsibility today to really start having those discussions about moving past fossil fuels, right? And so that's a big example of loss in our community, losing fossil fuels, and it's going to have huge impacts on our humanity. And maybe we can learn something from COVID about how it's affected our community and how we can be better prepared for the future. And so where I'm at right now is I'm kind of looking at this dark void, just like a global pandemic. We didn't know what it would look like. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot of troubling times ahead, Cameron.
So you're basically kind of, when you look into the future, this void is just the unknown, I guess. I don't know if you would say like chaos or the unknown events that are going to happen, and you are looking that way, forward thinking and thinking that it's not going to be very good.
Yeah,
right?
Just like the virologists who were looking at the rising human population and how transportation is happening and how there are maybe millions of plane trips a day. And a virologist is going to say, oh, ouch, those are all going to have to stop when an outbreak comes. Stopping all the planes, what do you mean? That's wild. You're wrong. And well, look at what happened, right? We had major stoppage of our systems. And so as a young person who lived through COVID, I'm looking at what will be similar and what will be different as we try to tackle another part of our humanity.
Right. So, you touched on COVID, this life altering, changing forever experience that we all went through in 2020 and are still, moving through it and still feeling the effects. And now you're looking forward into this unknown void. Within the purview of politics and running on a campaign in a platform for change, can you pinpoint one specific thing, I guess, in this void that you think will be able to, I guess, if you improve, this void will get better?
I think it's discussion. I'm on this track where my place in politics has been about creating discussion, right? And I say that because in politics, I haven't met behind closed doors with endorsees or with unions or with big groups. And all I do in my campaigns is I discuss, right? I go to the debates and I talk to people in public. It's like old school campaigning. And I think that what I'm doing is one example of how you can find purpose and find meaning during very violent times of social upheaval.
Right.
Discussion.
Okay.
And so as I look into this future, right, I really do think that having discussions with each other about these hard topics, just like we didn't want to talk to the virologists about having a real plan against a virus, now we need to talk to the scientists and have a real plan against greenhouse gas emissions and the plethora of crises that it has caused.
Got it. Okay. Interesting. Another thing that I kind of, want to talk about, I know that we've, discussed this before in many of our different, conversations we've had. I guess I want you to please define what civic engagement is, because, when you were saying discussion through the purview of politics, that kind of, jogs my brain and thinks, okay, civic engagement and having people, discuss what's going on in their local communities and, all throughout the various parts of the world and having that open discussion. So if you could give me a definition of civic engagement, and then kind of just, see where that, falls in and what you want to do about that.
Great question. Civic engagement to me is looking to your left, looking to your right, thinking about where you are, and then doing something. And that's a very unique definition because it applies to each of us differently based off of who and what and where we are in the world. And yet, it's because you're looking at your surroundings, it puts you on a different playing field than other types of engagement, right? So economic engagement, when you look at your surroundings in terms of economic engagement, you're actually engaging civically because that part of economics relies on the engagement of your community and the engagement of your people. So one example of this in economics terms is what is the need that I can fill, right? And you can't answer that question by going on Google, right? Or by, you can only answer that question by looking to your left, looking to your right, and finding out where you are, what your skills are, what benefit you can offer, and what you know about your community. And so civic engagement is using that framework, not for, economic development, but more for, helping people and their basic needs, right? And so I've taken multiple different roles in civic engagement. Currently, I'm in a leadership role. And there is an argument that people do or do not need leaders, but I think it is helpful, right? And I think I'm a good leader. But I've also taken other roles, like in the beginning of the pandemic, I recognized, along with other civic entrepreneurs, that there was a need for getting people groceries who didn't feel comfortable leaving their house, right? And so that took me getting on my bike and delivering groceries for my neighbors. And so that's one example of civic engagement. Another example is finding out what benefit you can have in your community.
Okay. So you just said civic entrepreneurship. So, and I think, what you were talking about is delivering groceries. So during COVID, you worked with, I believe it was COVID Assist. Was that the program or the company per se? So you were basically, helping deliver groceries because there was this application, there was this, social application that was allowing people to reach out that needed help. And you were there to, fulfill the need of bringing them groceries in that example. And so you said civic entrepreneurship. So I guess, like, what exactly does civic entrepreneurship mean to you? Let's just start there, I guess.
I just answered this question yesterday with AARP, this large group of people over the age of 50. One of their three main points for us as candidates for mayor was really addressing the digital divide that a lot of elderly people struggle with, access to high quality internet, access to devices, right, that have been made in the past 20 years. And this is a great example of how civic entrepreneurship can help this population that has already identified their need. They've already raised their hand and say, we need help getting connected. And I think that's where people who are interested in developing things for the common good, they can see this problem of how many tens of thousands of people, specifically elderly, not having access to the things they need and say, what can I do to really help this population? And one example I think is with COVID Assist. It was a very simple platform where it was two buttons: need help, willing to help. Mm-hmm. And that's how we should start framing our websites. No more, especially maybe there's a big button, 50 plus or digital divide capable. And it just blanks out everything from the page except for buttons, and that's what, like, for example, on the city website, it starts with my team. As mayor, I'm going to start with the city. And really, I think one opportunity would be working with web developers to really simplify the city website into just very simple, right? Because, but that's going to take a lot of work. You got to talk to people about what they need, how they use it, and then develop and practice and try new things. But I think that in the next 2 years, we should have a digital divide, kind of friendly system where maybe even using just an iPad, you can because an iPad is hard. You can't type on an iPad. So you can't, it's just tapping on an iPad. Okay, let's make a tap friendly website for the city. So it's one example of tech entrepreneurship. And now they run a one button website management platform. And then other companies can try to integrate this digital divide friendly one button platform. So that starts in San Jose, and identifying communities that have already asked for help they're already there asking, and we just need to listen. And that gets me into another point about how I really think leadership has not listened to the people when they raise their hand. It's like, hey, thanks for raising your hand. You get 1 minute at the mic.
Yeah.
Okay, what else? Do I get an
So-
answer? No.
Right. So I wanted to just kind of expand a little bit more on like, like the civic entrepreneurship. Because I think it's honestly a really like cool and innovative topic that's going to be starting to really, articulate into something in the coming years, because we're going to start seeing the need for private sector businesses to start, fulfilling certain social needs. Now, where it kind of, in my perspective, is that when I think of civic entrepreneurship, I think of the conjunction of public and private sector. Now, I know my mother is someone who goes, the private sector should never work with the public sector. They have two different purposes in a society. You have the public sector that is looking after the social welfare and the well-being, while the private, sector of society is providing the goods and services and overall quality of life and economic growth in a society. So do you think that is going to be the ultimate state of what civic entrepreneurship, civic engagement is, just the joining of private sector and public sector? And do you necessarily, as a mayoral candidate, do you think that is the best approach for having a government such as, the San Jose city government being able to try to partner with private businesses? Or do you think there's other needs that need to be met with the city resources rather than, partnering with private sector companies?
Government over business, people over government, and the environment above all. That is the structure that we need to build within our city government. I think we've recognized recently that current forms of government, especially in America, at all levels, have really struggled with adapting to this new modernized tech-driven economy, where there's a big need for legislation and activity to kind of develop this massively churning economy. There's also a big need for developing our massive population, which has really gone through a lot. And so in these two pools, I think there needs to be a divide. And what your mother has identified correctly is that because we had this government structure that was not developed to be ready for this huge economy,
Right.
we've really struggled with adapting. And so I would really like to pursue, in my term, identifying how the city government could be adapted to create maybe even two bodies, where there is the people governing body that has the current mayor and 10 city council members, maybe even 20 city council members, maybe even 30 city council members, and then possibly even an assistant body, right, like another department that really deals with everything that's currently happening, just to kind of free up more resources. And really, so yeah, I'm interested in pursuing different models of government. And that ties in with the current topic of strong versus soft mayor. And I would like to point out that we are struggling with even determining how much authority our mayor should have. I'm on a completely different topic.
So that soft and strong is basically saying like soft figurehead, strong actually has weight in decisions being made.
The veto power, right? And just like our president, right? Who's a strong president, obviously, and whereas right now the mayor is just one of the votes, although they can't be the deciding vote because it's an even.
Right. Yeah. City council. Yeah.
And some would say that other cities like Chicago and LA, they have a veto powered mayor. And I just don't think that's the right conversation. I think we should be talking more about who our mayor is working for rather than what power they have.
Right. Exactly. Agreed. I guess the last thing, just to kind of wrap up the civic engagement, I guess I want to see kind of like be a creative a little bit. I want to know, like, if you were just looking out and you saw into a crystal ball, like 10 years into the future, and ideally the form or the structure of the government that you were talking about, saying that, you want to express and try to experiment with different forms or discuss different forms of government in 10 years, can you give me some examples of what that would look like. What structure of government would that look like, and how would it be different in 10 years, like in a whole decade from now?
Okay, so in 10 years, there will be an election to elect a group of people who serve for the next 4 years. And I bring that up because within now and the next 10 years, we're not going to have the people in office who are ready to have these conversations. I'm not sure why it's going like this. In 10 years, we will be electing a new wave of people to represent us. And that's about 2 election seasons away. This election season has been docile. The upcoming presidential election season is going to be possibly very violent because we're going to have big clashes of parties. So there may be a lot of division. Fingers crossed, knock on wood, but very recently we had a string of mass shootings in schools. Nothing has changed in terms of the amount of guns in America. And I would be very concerned if during this next election season coming up, there was a string of violent, divisive attacks on democracy. Things that would make it say, oh, I don't know if I'm ready to go to a debate anymore. That's a dangerous place to go, right? And we don't have that in discussion right now, but one example of that will have a really big impact on the next election season. And so, sure, I've now ran for office on 2 election seasons in a row, 2020 and 2022. And, I could keep doing that. At some point, I'm going to look back on this election season and say, wow, we were really calm back then. Things were really like neutral. And in 10 years, I'm looking at a non-neutral time. I'm looking at a large population of chronically unsatisfied people, right? In many different assets. If it's family life or work life or education or healthcare, there's gonna be a large population who already exist of being really dissatisfied. And so it will be hard to lead in 10 years. And I'm grateful that I had this experience in the early 2020s to really take a stab at kind of this 50 years of leadership. I think that 50 years has come to a close with the COVID pandemic, and now we're approaching a new phase in what's going to happen. And I think that new phase is really going to take light coming into 2030.
Got it.
What's it going to look like? I think it's going to look like a lot of civic engagement, a lot of people looking around and thinking, hey, that Trader Joe's next to me, they're not able to have bread for 4 days a week. That's how it was in the pandemic, right? I don't know why everyone bought bread, but Trader Joe's after 5 p.m., they didn't have any bread on the shelves. And what if that happens more frequently towards the end of this decade? Someone's going to look around and say, hey, look, most of my neighbors can't buy bread from the local Trader Joe's. I'm just going to open up a bread shop. Okay. And now that's civic engagement because you're reaching out to your community, you're looking at where you are, you're recognizing the need, and you're acting on it. And now you're making bread.
Cool. I like that. And it's kind of like, that you're kind of tying it back a little bit because, when you were talking about, in terms of economics, you can be doing civic engagement, right? There's a need, your local need. My neighbors don't have bread. I'm going to start making bread to fulfill that need to my neighbors while also pursuing a social cause because they don't have bread and they don't have the necessary resources.
And for me, both in the last season and this season, my line in this time that really got me in it was, quote, I am the most qualified youth candidate to run for mayor. And that made me feel like I had a moral responsibility, even though I had my misgivings on how committed I could have been or how it was going to go or how much stress it was going to cause me. The fact that I had that notion really drew me to being engaged. And even that did pan out because there is a 19-year-old running for mayor, but Nicholas Travis Hill hasn't shown up to any debates and has really struggled to kind of have that momentum. And so I was true in saying that out of the 7 candidates, I'm the most qualified one under the age of 25. And that's my current void. Although climate action is, well, it's a big thing. It's happening, folks.
I mean, that's a very large topic in the sense of when we just say, oh yeah, like climate action. There's so many other facets that fall under that umbrella that need to be fixed before you can even tackle. It's not even like an issue. It's almost like a paradigm. It's almost like this is what we're going to be dealing with. We are going to be dealing with climate change and massive refugee crises. I mean, I remember, I don't specifically remember, I think it was a couple years ago, I saw a Vice report on the farmers in Central America. And it was just a video talking about their ability to not grow any more food. Like they were not able to grow their crops. And so they were sending their families, you know, obviously up through Central America, into Mexico to the Texas and Mexico border. And it was just showing, you know, that was 3 years ago. And we just keeps progressing, getting worse and worse and worse. It's just going to be the umbrella that every other problem falls under. It's no longer an issue. It is the paradigm of our generation. So that's like a whole nother, you know, topic and things like that. But
and I'm looking up the rate of urbanization currently. Rate of urbanization is what you just talked about. Rural communities are starting to become either uninhabitable from like lack of farming, and they are moving into urban areas. So for example, when you discuss that Central American farmer, they most likely move to the nearest urban area, anywhere between 50 or even 500 miles. And what we've looked at is that in the past 10 years, another 320 million people have become urbanized. And that's a 4% increase from 2010. And that number is growing. And we are an urban area. We are an urban nation. And so these urban areas in India and in Mexico and in countries in Africa and Asia, I mean, everywhere across the world, they're becoming really burdened with the human life, right? Bodies are now taking up so much of our urban areas, and it's not sustainable. Urban areas are driven off of fossil fuels. You know, the rural farmer had a much different way of life. They got their food from their farm. Now they're getting their food from the local grocery store, which relies on heavy industry to get that food to the store.
Yeah, to effectively operate in you know, and being a residential, you know, and just normal consumer in San Jose, you look at it and it almost just like absolutely requires you to consume fossil fuels. And if you don't, you're at a different, you know, disadvantage, right? Like you can be like bike or like bus everywhere, but obviously there's trade-offs with all those things. Even though it's better for the environment, you're not consuming fossil fuels. There's also other opportunity costs to what you could do getting somewhere faster, the ability to go to the store, the ability to be freedom and movement.
Yeah.
Freedom and movement. I mean, you look at the freeways and you can't really move. But yeah, so it's like it really shows that it is very hard, you know, to really operate in this city without, you know, the consumption of, you know, non-renewable resources, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So it's been a good conversation. There's definitely a lot of things that are changing. I'm happy to be a young person in the 21st century. Cameron, how do you think about your future coming into this decade and moving through to the 2030s? What are you ready for? What are you excited for?
Well, so I'm excited. So, you know, there's obviously, I am, you know, obviously, I guess, very realistic when it comes to my outlook on the future. And I know that there are going to be a lot of issues, and it's going to take a lot of smart people to really kind of hunker down and try to come up with these solutions in a way that, you know, incentivizes economic growth and social well-being. But what I'm really excited about is, you know, I've said earlier that I was a Bitcoin and, you know, crypto enthusiast. I don't see it as, you know, just like a new way to invest and make money. I really do believe in the underlying technology of blockchain, and really about what the innovation that came from Bitcoin and cryptocurrency was. How do you create a system of self-interested participants, market participants? How do you get them to work together in a trustless manner? Blockchain technology is essentially a database innovation. That's all it is. It's a ledger that is basically distributed through a bunch of nodes that cannot ever be changed once the block is minted, blockchain, right? And so that innovation really comes from, how do we create this kind of system that people don't have to know each other or trust each other, but it will work because there is an incentive. And so I really think that the use cases and the applications that are going to come from that are going to be quite amazing and bring a lot of good into the world in the next decade. One of the things that I just, actually wrote an article about was called, the feature is called DAO. It's called a decentralized autonomous organization. The way that you can think of this is a native internet community with a shared bank account. So this DAO, basically a decentralized autonomous organization, will allow people all throughout the globe. There is no restriction on borders on the internet, correct? In this internet native community, people can come and join together and basically work together on solving specific issues. And the way that this works is this DAO, this community, this organization is governed by the code that was created when the DAO was launched. And so when you were talking about, there is going to be a need for civic engagement. There is going to be a need for social entrepreneurship. There is going to be a need for people coming together and discussing. Where I look at it and I go, wow, where a DAO could come in, a decentralized autonomous organization could come in and say, I want to start building and I want to start helping out my local community. So all of the locals in the area, let's say Rose Garden DAO, right? All these people come together and say, hey, we have very specific needs, but we need to connect everyone together. And once we connect everyone together, we can pool together resources, and we can do this in a way where I don't have to trust everyone, but I know that once you engage with this DAO and the code is going to allow it to operate in the way it's supposed to, people can then start pooling money together and start fixing things and beautifying the area. I mean, that's, gentrification is kind of a touchy subject, but more very, very specific local community needs, you can actually find a way to build these things without necessarily the authority from, other central powers and stuff like that. So.
Well, and that's a really fun topic. And it's one of the examples of how, as living in a developed nation or a very wealthy nation, we are going to have benefits of technology that are going to help us through this decade. And but the one joke I always make is, don't get hit by a car, because it doesn't matter how bright you are or how much you're ready if you get taken out by one of these unfortunate events.
Exactly. Cool.
Great stuff. Well, I'll close it out here. Really thank you, Cameron, for participating in this discussion on civic engagement and, what does it mean to be alive in the 2020s? We have a lot of work to do as individuals, and yet we're both still under the age of 25. So we have a lot of learning to do. I'm really excited for, both of our paths, because we have tried really hard on discussing these important topics of people and planet, that I think that some organization is really going to benefit from the likes of us, people who have really spent time on the streets of San Jose, and not isolated from the real problems in our community. So I'm definitely not isolated. I know you're not. And any last words, Cameron?
I guess all I would say is, especially for, young people, like our peers that are kind of like looking out into the future and just kind of, doom and gloom and just, seeing a lot of things not really going, their way and then not really believing in that you're going to like have a future. I would just say, basically for all of, my peers and things like that, focus on being a continuous learner. Always be curious to learn more. Always try to be a better person the next day, regardless of what else is happening and all of that stuff. Just always try to continuously learn, be a better person the next day, and always try to make your actions reflect who you are, regardless of everything else happening out in that world. And so I could just, take that home and think about it and That would be it.
Okay. Well, this has been Pod in the Park, ex Marshall for Mayor, return episode. And thanks for tuning in.